Hi everyone, my name's Helen and welcome back to my beauty channel with a scientific twist. In today's video I'm going to tell you about the first results that I have from the lab, and this is to compare the pigmentation of what I think is the most iconic eyeshadow palette here on YouTube, and that is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette. And so I'm going to compare the pigmentation of this eyeshadow palette to one of its drugstore dupes, which is the Makeup Revolution Iconic Vitality palette. So if you want to find out how the pigmentation of these two palettes compares to each other when I tested it in the lab, then please stay tuned. So the first thing to note about these two palettes is that this guy here is £43 and this guy is £4. So there's a huge difference in the cost of these two palettes, and I'm going to look at the pigmentation difference. If you want to know more about the method and how I'm doing it, then I'll link the video down below of the experiment that I'm doing. I really suggest that you go back and watch that. In the lab, I take a piece of filter paper, and then I take my NYX blending brush and I weigh the filter paper, then I coat the filter paper in the eyeshadow, and this is my Blue Peter moment. Here is one I made earlier. And then I place this filter paper in a machine called a UV vis spectrometer. Now the video that I just mentioned that's linked down below explains a little bit more about how the UV vis spectrometer does, but in a nutshell it tells me precisely what the colour is like, and it tells me how intense the colour is. So the results of comparing these palettes allow me to split the eyeshadows into three different categories. The first one are shadows where they're identical in both palettes. The second category is where the colour is the same but the amount of pigment in the eyeshadows is different. And then the third category is where the actual colour of the eyeshadow is different. So let's start off with the first category. One of the eyeshadows which is identical in the Anastasia Beverly Hills palette and the Makeup Revolution palette is this Bon Fresco colour. So I'm going to try now and put on the screen the data that I found and talk you through it. The data that we get is a spectrum, and you can plot it on a graph, and along the bottom axis is all the different colours of light from 700 nanometers, which is red light, up to 400 nanometers, which is the violet light. The data above 700 is infrared light, and we can basically ignore that because we can't see it with our eyes, so it won't affect the colour that we see. So this is the spectrum that I get for Bon Fresco. The important thing is that when I overlap the spectrum from the Makeup Revolution palette, then the spectrums are basically identical. You can see that the shape is the same and the intensity of the lines overlap one another. So Bon Fresco is pretty much identical in the Anastasia Beverly Hills and the Makeup Revolution palette, and I get the same results for Vermeer, Primavera, Tempera, Raw Sienna, Burnt Orange and Warm Taupe. So all of these colours are essentially identical in the ABH palette and the Makeup Revolution palette. The colours are the same and the intensity of the pigment is the same, and what you can notice is that all of these colours are the transition shades and the two light shimmer colours. Now we can move on to the second category, and this is where the colour is the same but the intensity of the pigment is different in the ABH versus the Makeup Revolution palette. Now a good example of this is Realgar. So I'm going to try again and put the spectrum up on the screen. What you can see is that with the two traces, they have the same shape, but in the Makeup Revolution one, the line is lower and so the intensity of the pigment is lower. There's actually about 50% less pigment in the Makeup Revolution palette compared to the ABH palette. So the shadows that fall into this category are, as I said, Realgar, but also Cypress Umber, Antique Bronze and Golden Ochre. So the ABH palette has twice as much pigment as the Makeup Revolution palette for these shadows. Now we can have a debate about whether that matters. I tend to use my Makeup Revolution palettes for everyday work looks. I find that I can get something that's a little bit more subtle, more easily. They're also easier to work with if you're a beginner and you are still working on your blending skills. And then I use my ABH palettes for if I'm going a much more intense look because of the higher levels of pigment. So now we can move on to the last category. These are the eyeshadows where there's actually a difference in colour. It's not just a difference in intensity. And this is the case for the rest of them. So that's Love Letter, Venetian Red and Red Ochre. Notice that they are all the red, pinky colours in the palette. So again, I'm going to insert the data onto the screen now. And you can see that these graphs are totally different shapes to one another. In the Makeup Revolution palette, the shape is much narrower, and this produces, as you can see, or I don't know whether my camera will pick it up, but the Makeup Revolution Love Letter dupe is a much truer, sharper pink colour, whereas in the ABH palette, it's like a pink, but it's like richer with like almost purpley tones to it. So this difference in colour comes from the different red pigments that Anastasia Beverly Hills uses compared to Makeup Revolution. Anastasia Beverly Hills uses a pigment called Carmine, which is the pigment that makes a lot of eyeshadow palettes and a lot of makeup actually non-vegan because it's made from crushing up bugs. And if you're interested, my next video is going to be on how they make Carmine. In Makeup Revolution, they use a different type of molecule. For anyone that's interested, it's actually an azo dye, and this is why the palette from Makeup Revolution is vegan, but the Anastasia Beverly Hills one isn't. So, in conclusion, the transition shades from the ABH palette are really well duped by Makeup Revolution. The colours are essentially the same and the intensity of the pigment is basically the same. But if you love these pinky, reddy colours and you're looking for a dupe for those, I don't think that Makeup Revolution did a very good job of duping those, unless you don't mind it being a sharper pinky colour, in which case you will like the Makeup Revolution one. And the rest of the shades, so Cypress Umber, Realgar, Antique Bronze, and Golden Ochre, there's about twice as much pigment in the Modern Renaissance palette compared to the Makeup Revolution palette. But I want to know what you guys think. Have you tried these palettes? Do you agree with the findings that I have? Do you find that the pigmentation, the lower pigmentation in the Makeup Revolution palette is actually useful? Or what do you guys think about it? So comment down below, let me know what you think. So that's about all I have to share with you today. As I said, my next video is going to be about how Carmine is made, so how they make it from the bugs. But I think the video after that is going to be looking at another drugstore dupe of the Modern Renaissance palette, which is the Wet n Wild Rose in the Air. So if you're interested in either of those, then please subscribe to my channel and head over to my Instagram and follow me there as well. Thank you so much for watching, lots of love, and I'll see you in my next video.